Hello everybody, Captain Sidarius here. It's again the time of the year in which I celebrate the anniversary of Star Trek, and I'm so happy to finally talk to a very special veteran, Rick Knox, also known as P81, a veteran modder in the Star Trek gaming community. Hi there, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
I know your name for, I think, at least 24 years, and it's great that you are still basically a geek, a Star Trek fan. You guys can see it. I have a video chat with him, and his bookshelves behind him are full with Star Trek and Star Wars ships. It's so good to see that developers are still nerds like we are.
Absolutely.
But before we go really into today's topic, I would like to know a little bit about yourself. Who are you basically?
Well, I'm Rick Knox. Mnemonic81 back in the old game modding days, which, like you said, was 25 years ago. And that's kind of where I got my start, actually, was modding for Starfleet Command and then Armada. And that was pretty much, well, I think I did I did another game too, and I can't even remember what it was. But that was about it for my modding. I got into the game industry kind of along those lines. First for Starfleet Command 2, I did some ships for Orion Pirates. And then Mad Dog Software picked me up for the Armada sequel. So that was kind of the beginning for me, getting into the game industry and getting started. And of course, I got to work on Legacy, which was pretty freaking awesome because honestly, like in-house, not a lot of people were doing Federation ships. It was mostly, we had a guy who really loved like making Klingons and a guy who's really good at the Borg, right? But, you know, it was a very small team of like maybe 5 artists. So I pretty much did the entire Federation fleet by myself, which was, I don't know, it wasn't even like working. It was just like continuing to mod, but getting paid to do it. So yeah, that was my first assignment, was Legacy. And back then it was called Star Trek Admiral, but it never made it quite that far with that title. There was a bit of a hiatus, and then they picked it back up, and then we finished it off. So, yeah.
There is so many questions already, but one thing I just have to ask you, since you worked on Legacy, it was so strange for the gaming community that when Legacy was released, just I think a few weeks later, Windows Vista came out.
Mm-hmm.
And it killed basically the multiplayer. Did you do any testing on the Windows Vista environment? Did you just miss it, guys?
I never messed with Vista while I was there. And not only that, like I was never involved in like audio stuff or anything like that. So I had generally not even be. In fact, I kind of just, in a way, I was siloed because I just kind of sat in my cube and cranked out ships every day. And so most of my interactions sometimes would be with the designers, game designers. They'd be like, what do you want to do with, what do you think this ship is? And I'd be like, oh, that's a destroyer, right? Like they didn't have a lineup of ships. So the ships that are in that game were ships that I decided would be in that game because there was so many ships needed and they had no idea what exactly they would want to have. So I just made tons of ships and I kit bashed some together, and you know, because they'd be like, oh well, we need a scout or something, and so I would kit bash one together out of other pieces. So I never really got to all of the testing and stuff like that. I pretty much just made ships, put them in the game, flew them around, made another ship.
I totally understand that you were there for the ships, but I had to ask it because this is a burning question for the Legacy community for a long time.
Oh yeah, sure. That never came across to me. And we did like a PC Gamer article that interviewed me over the ships, and I kind of went into it there, like what my role was and all that stuff. But man, that was so long ago. I don't even know where that. I had the magazine. I don't even know where it is now. In a box somewhere.
Well, at least you still have it.
Yeah, it's around somewhere, along with signed game boxes and things like that from my early career. Back in the early 2000s, when you launched a game, everybody was super excited and would pass your boxes around and get them signed. And it was kind of a big deal. It's a little different now. But back then, that's how it was.
I miss those boxes, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. I miss those days, honestly. It seemed like most places were more indie and more creative back then than some of the giant mega games that you get these days.
Talking about those classic boxes, especially the Star Trek ones, what games did you play? What were your favorites? Stuff like that?
Well, if I was on a Star Trek game, I played that game. I played it constantly. So, and most of the time, I play the games that I work on just because I want to see what, how things are going. I always test my work in the game because you want to make sure that it's the right size and things line up and all that fun stuff. So I played Legacy a ton, and for a long time, I played Starfleet Command 2, especially the Orion Pirates version, all the time. I played Dynaverse constantly, and I had friends who played. And obviously I played Armada, and I mostly played Armada because I wanted to mod it. So, there was a big motivation there for me. I'm an original series guy over Next Gen, so one of the mods I did replaced all the Next Gen ships with original series, which was pretty hilarious. And we did like this big crazy mod that the main mega weapon was the Genesis device. You could like shoot it into a planet that was there, and it would jack the planet up, and then it would explode and kill all the bases and all the ships around it. It was nuts. But we were basically made like a Star Trek 2 sort of thing with Khan and all that, because that's my preferred time period. So we converted the whole game over. It was like 4 or 5 of us doing that, and I just did all the art. Other people did like sound effects and other audio thing, FX and integration into the game, and we all kind of spitballed the storyline. It was mostly about blowing things up, though.
And did you also play Bridge Commander and maybe Klingon Academy?
I did. I played Bridge Commander. I never really modded that one. By then, I was already busy doing a 9-to-5 in the game industry, so I didn't make anything for it, but I did play it. I tried to play the original Starfleet Academy. I didn't really enjoy that one. I played Klingon Academy. I thought it was better, a better game. But at the end of the day, like every time I would play a game like that, I would want to go back and play Starfleet Command. And then I also played Birth of the Federation, which was, I don't know if you remember that game.
I love it. It's a unique flavor.
Yeah, it was a very different game. Not combat heavy so much as strategy heavy. A sort of 3-dimensional chess game rather than straight up blowing things up. But I really enjoyed it. And it was fun. It had a lot of... it was a dynamic game, so I kind of missed that one. A lot of those old games will not operate on my PC, so I don't get to play those anymore.
Well, I can be the message of happy news there, or good news there. I would say every Star Trek game out of the 90s is working on Windows 11.
Really?
You need some fixes, but you can do everything.
Huh. That's crazy.
Star Trek Armada, Elite Force, Bridge Commander, they are all on GOG, so it's just an easy install. But Birth of the Federation is hosted by Armada Fleet Command. They offer an installer which gives you a Windows 11 patch, widescreen support. It runs.
That's awesome. I had no idea. I have the old CDs, but it's like they don't work in a computer without a CD-ROM.
I also have old SSDs, now of course ISO files, but the good thing is the GOG guys did some special magic. They developed their own wrappers for Armada, for example, and it runs so much better than the disk version.
Oh,
It's night and day.
that's very cool.
Especially if you consider mods like Star Trek versus Star Wars or the Millennium Project. The disk version on Windows 10 was a slideshow a little bit. And the GOG version, it's just normal gameplay, 60 FPS constant in 4040p for my case, but a friend of mine plays it on 4K, so yeah, not a problem.
Wow. Jeez. Resurrection of those old games.
Of course, talking about those mods, how did you get into modding? What was the first inspiration for you to do something?
Well, so I played the original Starfleet Command, but then Starfleet Command 2 came out, and it was very much like another game that I played in the 80s called Starfleet Battles, which it was based on. And it was so, like, Taldrin had made it so accurate to the game that I could literally go in and look at the stats in they had a text format for the ships, for the stats, and you could go and look at them, and they would be spot on to the ships that were in that old game. And so, except for the fact that it was real time, pretty much a lot of the tactics that I would use as back in the 80s totally worked in this game. And so that was another reason that I kind of became obsessed with that game. So once that game came out, like, I've always been an artist my entire life. I just didn't think that there would be any avenue for me to make any money that way. But when this came out, I thought, I'm going to learn a few programs and see if I can't make some models, right? I have a lot of ideas and, I could draw them. So I thought maybe I could model some of these if I could learn the tools. So I just, I think I started with soft image, as they say, and started doing some modeling there. And then, learned, there was no YouTube back then. So I'd have to bug other people, other modders. And I knew one guy who was in the industry, and he was in the UK. So time zones weren't quite right. So I'd have to shoot him an email and maybe get an answer the next day. I wasn't sure how to do something. And it was just a lot of trying to find manuals and things. But, I muddled my way through and made a few ships. And then Armada, I also made ships for that. And they had a model editor, which was not awesome, but you could use it to move vertexes around and sort of fashion ships. But then later, they were nice enough to actually give us an exporter for Max. So I learned Max, 3ds Max, and use their exporter. And then I was able to get actual new ships into that game, which was pretty cool. And so that's kind of how I had artistic talent. I just didn't have a way until I, taught myself how to do it. I didn't really have a way to make tons of Star Trek ships. Once I started doing it, though, it was pretty addicting. I had a web page at one point where I just put all the ships I ever made, and you could just go download them. I had hundreds on there. It was crazy.
For me, and I guess for especially the younger audience, it's unbelievable how you learned all this stuff. Back then, we didn't have Discord. We had, luckily, maybe ICQ or what was it, MSN Messenger, stuff like that, without video calls. No YouTube.
Yeah. Well, you had forums, and if you knew people, like you said, you could ICQ them, and that was a help. I did know one actual real life game developer back then, and that dude was a pretty big help on some things. He didn't know soft image, but he did know 3ds Max, and he, would tell me. I didn't know anything about UVs and smoothing groups and all that crazy stuff back then. You have to just sort of trial and error and downloading other people's models and looking at them and figuring it all out. But I think if you're determined enough, you could definitely do it. And today with YouTube, if you want to become, well, practically any kind of game developer, there's videos. And if you're determined enough, you can get it done.
Absolutely. It's a lot easier. But to be honest, still to this day, I can't wrap my head around the aspect that most all ships in the Armada games, in Legacy, wherever you find them, are just flat images. And yeah, the game uses these images to make something out of it.
Well, you have a model, right? A 3D model, and then the flat images you're probably talking about are the texturing for the model. But if you can imagine a plane, right, made out of 4 vertices, the plane would be blank until you put a picture on it, right? And then you could put any image you wanted on top of that plane, and you would technically have a 3D model. All a starship is a very complex model made out of 100,000 planes. With and they've been unwrapped to that texture that you see, or multiple textures. These days, we use giant, enormous 4K textures, and we'll use 3 or 4 of them on depending on the model, right? A gun, for example, might have 2, 3, 4 of those if it's a hero asset. Any kind of like centerpiece or POI would have enormous textures and so many polygons, it's hard to fathom, especially with nanite. So, which is an Unreal technology. So back then we would make spaceships, and the ships, you couldn't go crazy. 1,000 polygons people were like, 1,000 polygons, that's unheard of, right? And these days I couldn't even model the bridge of the Enterprise for 1,000 polygons and have it look modern, right? So it's like, it's a very different world now in game development, because you can just go nuts on polygons. And back then you really had to think strategically. And we're several generations deep with game development now from where I came from. And these days you have normal maps, which are even now are sort of becoming old tech. But if we had had them in Legacy, it would have been amazing, because we could have made those ships look awesome, like really good. But we didn't have that. We had bump maps, which are like sort of an early technology for getting some kind of detail on flat surfaces. But when normal maps came out, you could do really crazy things with like low numbers of polygons and make them look really high res. And now you can just model the whole thing without even worrying about polygon counts and stuff.
Since I'm doing video editing, something completely different, I wonder, have the programs changed as much as the video editing programs, in the sense of, doesn't matter how many iteration a program has, it still crashes a lot?
That is a very good question. I would say with Max and Maya, which have been industry standards for decades, I've used Maya for almost my entire career, and it hasn't changed much, honestly. It's a good, solid, dependable program. That's why it's an industry standard program. Why studios all over the globe still use Maya, because it's a strong and stout program. But I've been using Blender for personal projects, and that is a very different program. So if you look at it like that, yes, they have changed. Tools like Fusion 360 are a very different way of modeling, but you can still get there with that program. It's a little niche, but you can really get a long ways with that thing. And Blender, of course, and ZBrush are very different approaches from Maya. So in that way, that there's been a lot of enhancements to the tools. But if you're looking at those industry standard tools, they almost look identical. There's some like slight changes. They added some new, like Autodesk added some new tools to Maya that made UV unwrapping and so on a lot easier. But I mean, overall, it's pretty much the same.
Interesting. Yeah. I tried some of those tools back in the day, but it was even back then for me hard to wrap my head around all those tools, especially my English was not that great back then, but also getting them to run stable was another big problem. So yeah, I skipped that part and I just said, hey, you guys out there make so much more out of it. It's better I focus my effort somewhere else.
Yeah, I think if you really want to make them starships, then put the time in, you'll totally get it. I couldn't do video editing. I've never even opened up video editing software. I'm more of a 3D guy myself, so you definitely got me on that.
Yeah, it's a different world, that's true. And I mentioned it yesterday. The one aspect I really hate in video editing is audio. Audio is the voodoo part of the whole recipe.
Oh, yeah?
You never know what you will get. And yeah, moving back to your creations, maybe the name Millennium Project rings a bell?
Whew, man. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say no, but it's been a very long time and also a lot of games. On top of that, since then, I think I've had my fingers in like 18 games, and I stopped modding after I got into game development because initially I was doing really crazy hours to get stuff done, and obviously I was very enthusiastic as a young lad, so I just basically spent all my time working on whatever game I was on. So after that, I admit I didn't look at a lot of mods or participate. Although people would ask, but it would just be like, if you're working 60 hours, 80 hours, you have like a wife and kids, you probably should see them occasionally. So unfortunately I didn't. But the thing is, it's possible I totally played it or whatever.
At least some of your models are in.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that. People still ask me from time to time on ArtStation, or they'll email me because my email is predictable and ask if they can use these models or whatever. And I always say yes, because why not? Right? So if people can take those models and run with them, make them higher res, put them in their mods, absolutely.
And the reason why I'm mentioning especially this mod is there is a very nice modder out there who is basically not really remastering all the old projects, but he's giving them a nice touch so they run a little bit more stable, fix some bugs, and yeah, some of your old content is included.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm glad to see it's still there.
Of course, you just mentioned that you worked on so many ships and mods. Can you still remember a few of your favorite babies?
Well, we did this, I think it was called Project APOC, maybe, something like that. But man, like I said, it was so long ago. It's hard to remember all that stuff. And I never, like, for about 2 years, all I did was work. I was in IT back then. All I did was work and then come home and work some more until I fell asleep. So I made so many ships, and sometimes I made just the ships, and other people would make mods out of the ships. So I think I only ever really I participated in basically 2 big mods. One was where I took Starfleet Command 2 and basically updated the models to FASA starships. If you remember FASA Star Trek, an old tabletop game from the 80s, I basically just made all of those ships, like the Northampton, the Chanley, the Baker, and just replaced a whole swath of ships with it. And so if you installed this mod, your fleet went from the stock starships to these old FASA designs. And I did the same, added some Klingons and Romulans as well to get the whole flavor in there, so that if anybody remembered that game, which even then was like 15 years old. So if anybody remembered that old game, they would actually be able to see their favorite ships duking it out in space. I didn't ever really want to change the ship stats. I wanted the game to remain balanced, and I knew that Taldrin had put in a lot of effort on balancing it because they stuck so closely to Starfleet battles. So I never messed with the stats. I just messed with the art so that people would get it's really just like a visual update, right? So you can get this, this cool old school 80s flavor out of the game. But I can't even remember the name of that. I'm the one who made it.
Well, after spending so many years in the industry, I guess it's not that easy.
I know. My brain is completely overloaded with all the crazy stuff I've done. So it's hard to remember that. But I do remember making it, and it was a pretty simple installer. And then I also had all the individual ships on my page. Like I said, I was in IT, so I ran my own web server out of my office. And so you could just go download stuff right off my server and then put it in your own game. If you just wanted one ship, you didn't want the whole mod, you could just go get the ship you wanted, right, or whatever. So that whole thing, plus all my Armada ships were up there. And that was the other mod. That was the mod I was telling you about, where we basically made it the Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3 era instead of next gen, and replaced all the ships with original series ships. Made this story sort of revolve around this Genesis device that somebody else on the team made that basically was just a bomb. Just a big crazy bomb that you'd shoot at a planet and then the whole planet would blow up or whatever. But somebody else was in charge of that. I just did the art.
You mentioned a few times that you are the TOS guy here. So I guess favorite ship, the original Enterprise?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I'm old enough that I got to see Star Trek the Motion Picture in the theater. And, I'm like 6, 7, right? And so the whole ship tour with that Scotty takes Kirk on around the ship pretty much influenced the rest of my life, honestly. So it took about 5 minutes to tour the ship in a space pod, but I was like, looking at that ship, I remember it to this day. That right there pretty much influenced me to be an artist. I would draw and sculpt that. I've made that ship so many times out of so many materials, like it's crazy. Until long before 3D was a thing. And I like Star Wars too. Like, what kid didn't love Star Wars? I'm a huge Millennium Falcon fan, but it's not quite the same as the refit Constitution. There's no replacing that ship. So yeah, I would say that definitely would be my absolute top favorite science fiction ship, but followed closely by Millennium Falcon.
For this interview, I also Googled, of course, your nickname. And the one thing, sadly, I found was the only Armada mod or ship out there which still is connected to this nickname is the Enterprise E. But of course, it's a very beautiful model.
Yeah.
And yeah, sadly, the rest is gone. So the website is offline, I guess?
That old website is long gone because I'm the one who hosted it. It was before there was like a cloud that you could host things on. There was no G Drive and no Squarespace or any of that sort of thing. You could purchase a domain, right? But I ran my own DNS servers. It was very hardcore back in the day because that was the way you did it. And or at least the way I did it. And I was in IT, so it was not a big deal for me to do. I ran mail servers and web servers and all kinds of nonsense on NT4 back in the day, Windows NT4, which I don't know if you remember.
Oh, yes.
But and I was like a MCSE certified, so I ran all my own stuff. But that was so long. That computer is so long gone. It's very far in the past. You'd need a time machine to get that thing. So yeah, and I don't have any. It's funny. I might have had those files maybe 5 years ago because I had backed everything up on a writable CD. So I had a book full of writable CDs with old ships on them. But man, I haven't seen that thing in at least 5 years. I'll bet you it's long gone. So all of it is faded to the past.
Do you still know the domain?
Oh, I don't. I don't even know that.
Because I just thought maybe it's on the Wayback Machine.
Oh man, I don't know. You could try my handle, Mnemonic81, is attached to a lot of crazy things on the internet. So you might be able to leverage that in some way, but I'll admit I've never looked. Geez, I can't even remember what that thing was called. That was half a lifetime ago.
Yeah, there's so many Star Trek sites, especially for games, which hosted so much content and it's gone. Yeah. It's just gone. Sadly.
I still do some artwork for people to download, but mostly it's environment art because that's kind of where I ended up sort of drifting, is more into the environment art side of game development. So I run an Epic store that has like a bunch of sci-fi environments on it that people can use to make their games or whatever. And I'm currently, I just started a new one. So I, try to keep that store somewhat updated, but I've never put any Star Trek or Star Wars specific things because I don't want, Paramount or Disney to come after me. So, and that would be a worry, if I were to do something like that. Not that I haven't been tempted. I just know, like, if I do it, I'm going to end up, getting yelled at. So.
Yeah, sadly, we have a few bad cases already. I'm not sure if you know Stage 9.
I don't, but I had seen. I was really interested in this fan production called Axanar, and it was shaping up to look really awesome. And I was like, man, this is going to be great. And I really loved the Ares, the ship they designed for it. Was a really cool ship. I even got one 3D printed and painted it because it was such a cool idea. And then I guess Paramount came down on him, and I didn't catch all the details. I just sort of caught the aftermath that there wasn't going to be an Axanar. And I'm like, man, I still watch the trailers every now and then because they were cool.
They did release something a few years later. It's just clips basically, but they released a little bit more content later on.
Did they?
Yeah.
I need to go look that up. I was very excited. Back then, there was we're talking maybe 10 years ago, there was a huge and very successful fan-made productions that were pretty much killing it compared to what Paramount was doing. And I think that's why, right? There was this show called Star Trek Continues.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that. I watched that whole thing and I was like, geez, this is crazy how good this is, right? For a bunch of fans to get together and make all this. It was like pretty convincing sets and stuff like that. And as a fan of the old series, and I was just I can't believe they got away with this. They got in under the wire is what I think.
Yeah, it was the right time also.
Yep, they got the shows made and out, and it was too late for Paramount to do anything to stop them from it. But it is kind of a bummer when you have something like that people are really passionate about, and there's no good way to get involved, right? Not without, violating a copyright. So, and I certainly understand that, companies, they deserve their copyrights. It's their property. But still, there must be some kind of allowance because there's so many creatives. I mean, that's where I came from, right? So being creative with these games and these properties got me my start.
Maybe you know it a little bit better since you're in the industry, but I, as the noob here, the nurse in the room, more or less, I never can understand why they kill projects like Stage 9. Stage 9 was a passion project by TNG lovers. They recreated the entire Enterprise D to walk around on the ship, basically. And yeah, they just killed the project. Why not hire such a team and say, hey, you make something great. Here is a little bit of money, make something out of it. And we sell it.
Was it virtual reality, or was it just like you walk around from your computer? Because
I think it was an option for VR there, but in general, it was just an Unreal Engine and you walked around in your typical ego shooter controls.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I know that there was there actually was a project that Paramount did where you did exactly that. And so they might have considered it to be competition. They had I believe they had put together, and this was a while back, but a navigatable Enterprise D that you could walk around. But it wasn't VR or anything like that, as I remember. And it was a while back, so maybe they thought it was a competition or something like that, maybe. I mean, a lot of times that is what it is, right? Like Blizzard, for example, will come down on private WoW servers if they're starting to become a little too popular, right? Because then it starts to cut into their business, and you can understand why, Blizzard would want to protect their property. And I think Paramount's probably the same. I'm always divided on these things because I get it. If that was my thing, if I had, developed this cool idea and then people just would, run around and steal it and do whatever they wanted with it, that might annoy me a little. But on the other hand, it's like you said, could there be some other way for them to participate and still, make that parent company some money? And I wouldn't say I'm close enough to the top of the food chain to know all the exact answers in regards to that, but I know that got to be careful with that copyright.
Absolutely, I understand that they protect their stuff. That's totally legit, and they should do that.
Yeah.
But on the other side, we have so many examples from the past where a small developer, a small mod team basically created something, and a big studio came and said, hey, you did an amazing job, come work for us, and we make a lot of money.
Yeah, that was more of a thing that happened in the old days. And the reason why it happened is that there weren't a lot of developers. When I got into this, there weren't a lot of people doing this kind of job. It was a very small industry, and a lot of people learned on the job. It was just like hiring driven people who would push themselves over the edge to figure things out. And that is how earlier games got made, by just piles of very driven people. And today you have college. People can go to college to do this stuff, and the industry is enormous, right? There's thousands, tens of thousands of game developers now. So you might be really good at modding. I don't know if you could get into the industry the same way I did now. Let's say you want to be an artist. You would have to build an incredible portfolio and maybe do some free work, volunteer on games in order to get anywhere to break in, because in a lot of ways people are looking for that college degree and portfolio, and you have to do something that's equivalent, right? So let's say you've got a mod team that makes a great Call of Duty mod pack that turns it into Star Trek Voyager, right? And you go and it's a great mod and everything. It's not hard to find 10 developers already into the industry to bang that thing out. So in the old days, yeah, they would have hired those people because there wasn't other people. And they would have been like, look, these people are so driven that they made this whole thing, as those were the ideal candidates back then. And today, they're industry professionals abound, right? So it's harder.
I never considered that aspect. Yeah, that's totally true.
Yeah, I mean, and right now, for example, I was recently laid off, so I'm in the market for a job, right? And I am competing with all of my peers for these jobs. And so if you're a modder and you're going to jump into the pool with the game developers, you have to compete with everybody who's looking for a job, including me, right? So that's just kind of the reality of it. That's not to say I wouldn't ever discourage anybody from wanting to be a game developer. It's a little turbulent as far as like keeping a job for really long periods of time. I think the longest I kept one was 11 years. and you have to stay on top of your craft all the time. So doing a lot of personal work, which I do. But yeah, I mean, if you were going to do it, you would really, that needs to be your thing. You let everything else go, and that is your thing. And all you do, if you want to be an artist like me, for example, all you do is model and texture stuff and find the newest technology, try Unreal, try all the stuff, try Lumen, like learn all the things, and then build an amazing portfolio. And then you can jump in.
Talking also about this learning process, how hard was it for you to get from the modder to the professional?
So, as I had said earlier, I had to teach myself how to do a lot of this modeling. And I had been doing it for a couple years by then, by the time I got my first gig. And that was with Taldrin, and that was a remote job. So they were in California. I was in Virginia. They would give me concept and stuff, and I would make the model. And I didn't have a lot of discipline at the time as far as like game development goes, because I'd never been a game developer. Once I went to Mad Doc, and that was an on-site job, I moved to Massachusetts and went in the office and got to learn from industry professionals, and that boosted my capabilities through the roof, right? And then I was able to take contract work on the side and do remote contract work. And every time I would take a contract, I would learn a bunch more. And then I went to Sony, and that place was full of talented artists, and I learned a ton of stuff there. And then I would go do some contract work and learn a bunch of stuff from that. And it was just back and forth, right? And the more stuff I did, the more people I interacted with, whether like this on a call or in person, I would learn a ton of stuff from them. And that was kind of the trajectory, right? I didn't come in knowing, to be honest with you, my first few models were good. I'm fortunate that I didn't have to make 10,000 polygon starships back then, because I would not have known how to do that, right? The ships I was making for Starfleet Command were like 400, 500 polygons max. If I got too high, and like a 256 texture, and it was like, if I had made anything bigger than that, they would have been like, "Are you crazy?" So, in a way, I kind of got lucky in being limited in what I could do. And today, like I said before, you can really model to your heart's content. I made a drill press once for a little side thing, and I did this. And I think it was like 100,000 polygons, because it was nanite, so it didn't matter, right? So it didn't matter. I'm like modeling screws and threads, making threads, and welded joints and stuff. It was nuts. And that's what you can do with something like nanite. You couldn't come close to doing anything like that, even 10 years ago.
I wonder, do you still remember, how did you get into the industry? With what portfolio? What ships did you show them, or what content?
I didn't have a portfolio. Taldrin was aware of my work, right? I was very active on the forum for Starfleet Command and posted my ships all the time and got developer attention that way. And then one day they just asked me if I wanted to help. Like, they didn't have enough people to finish it. And it's not like I, single-handedly, I think I only made like 3 or 4 ships for that game. They didn't even pay me. They gave me a copy of the game and a t-shirt. But that was my first real thing. And the only, quote unquote portfolio that I had were mods, right? And when I went to Mad Doc, again, I didn't have a portfolio, but what I did do was I took a bunch of Starfleet Command 2 ships that I made for my personal mod, for that FASA mod that I told you about. I had a whole bunch of these ships, and I made a video, and I used, I don't even think that program what was it? After Effects maybe, or I forget what it was. But I basically rendered in Max all the ships and what cobbled together effects I could get together, and then overlaid some music on it and pushed that thing out the door. And that was my, my art reel. But really the portfolio was my website and all the crazy ships you could download. You could just go there and download anything I made. And if you were a game company looking for a modeler, which I assume this is what Mad Doc did, was they just like looked at what I'd already made. And I've always been a clean modeler. So they just looked at that and was like, okay, this guy can model in texture and use Photoshop. So hired. Right?
Nice. Really nice. Would you say the developers today look at modding differently compared to back in the days?
Actually, I think it's probably more friendly if you think about the kind of support you can get now. For example, the Epic Store, right? You can go to the Epic Store and buy, heck, you can make your own game. You don't even need to mod an existing game, although people obviously do. You can go and buy practically any kits you want for pennies, right? You could buy entire environments for like $30 and you didn't have to make any of that stuff. I think that modding is a much more acceptable. People expect it, I think, when you make a game. They kind of expect it, and they use these engines like Unity and Unreal that are favorable to modding. If you know even just a little bit of coding for the Unreal Engine, for example, you can do all kinds of crazy things. That's not me, by the way. Like, I don't know that stuff, but I can get pretty far just making art for Unreal. And Unity is this, more or less the same way, just a different interface. But there's a lot of good. They don't have nanite, but they have some other stuff that's cool. And I've done my fair share of Unity projects, and because they use engines like that and not proprietary engines like they used to use in the old days, you don't have to hack anything, right? You don't really have to hack anything to make an add-on for a game. Heck, even World of Warcraft has add-ons, which you could, argue are mods, right? And all those private servers are mods, right? They're their version of the game. So even MMOs are getting modded, which in the old, when I worked on Galaxies, Star Wars Galaxies, that you couldn't mod that game. There was no modding that game. It was a homegrown engine that was hard enough just for the developers to work on, much less a modder who didn't know anything about it, right? It was not a public engine. And the fact that it was an MMO made it very difficult. And in fact, when they did the Star Wars Galaxies emulator, which you might know about, that game, they practically had to rewrite the code from the ground up. And I was like, y'all are crazy. You must really love that game, because I worked on it for years, but I don't think I loved it enough to rewrite the code from the ground up.
And they're still working on it.
They are still doing it. Well, I'm glad. I worked on that. I poured myself into that game for years, like 5 years, and I made all kinds of stuff for that game. Yeah, I was sad when it got shut down, but I'm glad that it's like the mods of old. It has received some life support with all these emulators, but they couldn't use the engine as is in order to get that. They had to rewrite all of that code. It's crazy.
Yeah, I won't argue there. I am a big fan of preserving gaming history, and if I can't play a game anymore, it's just a crime. It's really a crime for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm definitely going to look into the older Star Trek games you mentioned earlier, because I didn't even know you could play those.
And sorry, guys, I know it's Star Trek month, but I have to ask him, do you know Star Wars Galaxy Legends?
I don't think so, but refresh me. I never played any of the emulators.
They basically took the latest release of Star Wars Galaxies and added stuff. The latest thing, big thing they added is Bespin. So you have really the planet Bespin. You can have an apartment there. You have new ships. You have so much more content.
That's crazy.
So it's still surviving and thriving.
That's amazing. I am really glad that they did that. I'm really glad. I think that it's kind of, I really loved that game at first, but over the time, you know how it is with MMOs, over time, patches kind of change how the game plays, and then I kind of lost interest in it after a while. Plus, as with pretty much every game that I work on, I play the game, and I played a lot of Galaxies when I was on it, and I had multiple characters, and back then you had to pay for each character. You couldn't just have like 20 characters on one account. You had a separate account for every character. I had like 5. So I played the snot out of that game, and I really liked it. But after a while, you burn out, and I moved on to other things and played other games and other MMOs. I did play Star Wars: The Old Republic. I thought that was a fun game for a while, but I hit the wall on that one too eventually. But I think that game is still around.
It's still around, but my problem with modern MMOs, they are not community driven anymore. It's always a theme park ride.
Yeah.
Often you don't even see other players. And in Star Wars Galaxy, especially if you look at the old version, if you missed the shuttle, you had to wait for minutes. And what did you do? You chatted. Nobody chats anymore in an MMO except 5 guys.
Well, also you could build a city.
Yeah, be a mayor, be a dancer, everything.
Yeah, we had a cool little guild there in Galaxies, and we made a town, and we would do stuff together. And I unlocked my Jedi, which, if you remember that game, was like a really complicated thing to do.
The original version of unlocking a Jedi?
This was the original version, yeah.
Oh, you suffered. You really suffered.
Yeah. Well, you had to do all the holocrons and do all of the professions. I did every last profession, maxed it out on one character, which was part of the insane thing that developers were just like, oh, you want to be a Jedi, huh? So they just made it as absolutely torturous, which was great, though. And when I unlocked it, I lost my mind. It was hilarious. My wife was like, you're crazy. So, but yeah, I got the Jedi. And if you died as a Jedi, if that character died, it was permadeath. They didn't have permadeath in the game unless you were a Jedi. So you could spend all that time unlocking that Jedi and then just get whacked by a bounty hunter, because they could hunt for you with bounty hunter droids. So I hit on Endor, and a friend of mine who was a bounty hunter basically was my bodyguard until I could level up enough to kick everybody's butt. But because early Jedi, when you're in the Padawan tree, really weak. They were just like not good. It was not a strong class until later, when you got up to Jedi Knight, and then it got much, much better. And then you could kill like 10 people.
It was really special.
It was. They don't make them like that anymore. That's a fact.
No.
It's because, dude, I think it's because it's too much investment for a normal human. I'll admit, I invested a lot of time playing that game, to where my wife was like, hey, you have a family. So,
Yes and no. Because if you consider, modern games want to keep you playing. They enforce you with another carrot, another carrot, another carrot.
But they cap you. But they also cap you in a way where, so if let's say you play WoW, you have a cap every week that once you hit that cap, it's kind of pointless to play. They do want you to play, but what they really want is for your monthly subscription to keep going, right? They don't necessarily need you to play 8 hours a day, as long as you play a little bit every day and you log in and you stay with the game. The revenue is the same.
But there's the difference. Most modern MMOs are free-to-play and not subscription-based. Subscription-based, I'm totally with you. But if you have a free-to-play market, you want the players in-game so they can look at the shop, look at the items, and invest more.
I'll admit, I don't play I'm too old school to play the free-to-play games, and I don't do the microtransactions. I'm just an old curmudgeon. So I don't do it. So like if somebody's trying to like sell me like some microtransaction assets, I'm like, nah, I'm fine.
I'm also not into that in general, but I have one weakness, and that's Star Trek. Star Trek Online is a really good Star Trek experience. I love what they're doing.
I played that too right at the beginning, and they didn't have the microtransactions yet when I first played. So I played and leveled up, and I really enjoyed playing. The ships were different back then. They didn't look as good as they do now. They really overhauled the engine and the interiors. So they had to rush Star Trek Online out.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. They had only 9 months, I think, or 18 months. 18 months it was, to rush it out. It's unbelievable what they achieved there.
I know, it was really unfair, but I played it. As an environment artist, I wasn't super impressed with the environment. And at the time, I really loved the ship combat, but then they kind of force you to do away team stuff. Back then they forced you to do it. I don't know how it is now, but they would force you to do it, and it was so boring. Beaming down and doing whatever crazy task they had you do, and then beaming back up, and then you could go do some more starship combat. So I played it for a while, but from what I can tell, it's a very different game now, and the ships are actually like screen accurate now, and they weren't back then. They were trim textured, which I don't know if you know what that means, but basically they had sheets of details, and they would map the details onto the model, so it kind of looked like the ship. But if you looked at the ship, like the model was right, but the textures were wrong, and I'm very detail oriented, so it would put me off a lot of times, especially the Enterprise D. I couldn't look at it because it would make me mad. But they completely overhauled all of that stuff. And a friend of mine actually worked on it, Thomas Marone.
The Cryptic Cat.
Yeah, the models they made for that game after, when they finally had time to really sit down and do a good job, look fantastic. So I'll admit, but then I'm afraid that with the microtransactions that I fall into your trap and have to go buy starships. And I'll be like, no, I can't do that.
It's funny, I just gave basically a crash course to a new player in Star Trek Online, but I gladly do it again. The amazing thing is the love that developers have for the franchise, like the ship's details. It's unbelievable. They recreated Deep Space Nine with the original floor plans. You can read the screens for the first time in-game. They have, I think, nearly 50 different voice actors from the shows.
You're killing me. You're making me want to go play it.
And the good thing, it's the best and fairest free-to-play game out there. Because you mentioned Star Wars: The Old Republic. In that game, in the early stages of free-to-play, you had to pay money that you can sprint. A basic function in any game, and you had to pay the...
Oh, that's terrible.
And in Star Trek Online, you get everything for free if you invest time. Or you have, like I, for over 10 years a lifetime and get every month $4 worth of credits.
Well, I was going to say with that, the Old Republic, at first, it wasn't free to play. You paid your $15 a month. And that was the version I played. When they changed their subscription model, I stopped playing. So I never got to see like the starship combat that or the fighter combat. I never got to see that. The version I saw was on a rail. If you played the early version, you didn't really control the ship. You sort of controlled the turrets, but you didn't really control your ship. You just sort of, it was like a roller coaster. You fly around. But yeah, once it went to free to play, I just kind of stopped playing. And yeah, I don't know Star Trek's model, Star Trek Online's model, but I think at first it wasn't free to play as well. And if I like a game, I don't have a problem paying that monthly fee. I've played tons of MMOs, and I will pay the monthly fee.
Absolutely, I'm totally there with you. And like you mentioned, the beginning of Star Trek Online was very rough, but nothing you have seen in Star Trek Online back then is now in the game. It's completely changed, and it's totally worth it. You can play the entire game without spending money. You will have always the carrot that you want to spend money, that you should spend money, but yeah.
So what happens with the away team stuff and all that?
It's still there. In 2011 or 12, they introduced shooter mode. It's a fancy way of they created a special UI and yeah, basically gave you the option to use your mouse to view around in an ego shooter way. But of course, the MMO mechanic is still the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice gimmick. Didn't change much. What changed was definitely the content, that they had now nice planets, nice ships, actors, many more features. You know, if you remember, you got bridge officers and ships. Those ships are not only in your database anymore. You send them out to away missions and you get resources that way.
Oh, that's crazy.
And what brings us back to the general topic of our discussion, they had a kind of modding. They had something called the Foundry, where the players could create their own missions. They couldn't create new assets, but every asset in game the developers authorized, they had available and they could use. So they created thousands of missions. At the end of the Foundry, end game of the life of the Foundry, they basically integrated the Foundry missions into the world. So you just went down with your ship to, let's say, Kronos, and you passed by Vulcan, and a mission popped up saying, hey, there's a Foundry mission, just press F and you will read the mission text.
That's pretty cool.
So it was really in the world. It was a kind of exploration. The only problem was every time they made an update to the game, a big one, where they changed really a lot of features, they had to put down the Foundry, update the Foundry, and try if everything runs again. Most of the time it was broken. Then they had to set it down, shut it down again and fix it. And it was too much effort. And they said, sorry guys, we have to kill it. But it was for a long time one of the core aspects why people played the game. Because, hey, you could create missions.
So you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, sadly. At some point, they even had contests where players basically were rewarded from the developers with at least a spotlight, sometimes I think in-game currency to create stuff. So it was on the front website, and there was a community manager hosting that the challenge. It was nice. It was really a special time.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah, but in general, really, if you want to spend some time, experience a lot of unique content in the Star Trek universe of old, definitely check it out. They have at least some of your favorite actors in it already.
Well, I know that they just released some new ships, right?
Yeah, that's also interesting maybe for you. They recently put in some ships from Armada, from Starfleet Command, so some TOS content.
Yeah. One of the artists reached out to me to, I don't know, just say hello. One of the ships that they were adding was a ship that I designed back on Legacy, I guess. Maybe Starfleet, I don't remember. Anyway, I made the original one. And I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago, an artist reached out and was like, hey, look what I made. I was like, wow, that looks really fantastic. I feel like that would have been a fun project to work on, a big Star Trek game. And, they're hard to come by these days. There used to be lots of Star Trek games, and there's not that many these days.
It was kind of a bad time after Activision started to sue Paramount. Legacy was the last big one, except Star Trek Online, of course.
Right, yeah.
Did you have a chance to play Star Trek Resurgency?
No. There was a Star Trek game I played on my phone for a short period of time, but then they wanted me to buy stuff. So I was like, And like I would have just paid for the game, right? Like that would have been my preference is I just pay for the game and then I play it until I'm done. But it was kind of interesting. It sort of was like Starfleet Command in a way, much more limited though, like no Dynaverse or anything like that. But it was kind of a, it was, I guess what was fun was that I could play it on my phone.
I think it even is called Starfleet Command.
Maybe. Yeah, I think you might be right.
There is this bad habit of the industry to rename the games like the old games. I hate it.
Yeah, but it wasn't as good. And they want you to buy a lot of stuff and I I'm not into that. So as soon as that happened, I was like, "Oh, I'm moving on then."
But yeah, going back to the modding aspect and your creations, looking back at everything, what would you say are you most proud of? What were some things you really wished you would have still around on your website to share with the world?
Yeah, I to be honest with you, I kind of wish I still had access to that. But because I hosted it myself, there's no way to get it back. But I definitely, even though I had a really good time, I know that these days I would have made, and the thing is, I would have looked at those ships and been like, well, that's not right, and that's not right. And then I would have wanted to remake everything at a super high polygon level, very high res, because that's just, you know, I've never gone back to remake any of them for anything. And like you said, Legacy was kind of like one of the last big ones. So I never really had a reason to go back, but I will say I had a really good time, especially of all the games, probably Starfleet Command 2 that I modded. Really enjoyed that game. Playing it, working on it, playing with my friends, and doing like all kinds of. The Dynaverse really made it what it was, if you could find a server. But I really liked it, you know. So I would say that was probably my favorite of all of it was working on that stuff and playing it. But it's kind of like we were talking about with the MMOs that they don't really quite make games like that anymore. And it was a hard game to play. It was complicated because it had a lot of bells and whistles. It was like the ultimate Starship simulator. So, and I don't think even Star Trek Online was quite that complicated.
After you switched from the hobby side to the professional side, did you ever mod again?
I didn't. I mostly, like I said early on, I was really busy with working on actual games, and that was very exciting and ate up my brain. And then later, as I kind of moved up in roles and stuff like that, if I were going to do any, like my portfolio is full of personal art that isn't even from any game. A lot of those projects were things that I did off to the side for skills training and keeping up with latest technologies and pushing myself, right? Because sometimes when you're working on games, you have to make what's for the game and you may not be able to push yourself or you may not even get some sort of fantastic piece of art to make. So if you want that, a lot of times you kind of have to come up with your own little side projects, and that's kind of where my Epic store came from. Was I wanted to try some technology out, but we weren't working on it in the studio I was at. So I decided to whip up a environment of my own. It took about 3 months altogether. And so you could maybe call that modding to some degree. It's like modding in a way because you don't necessarily get paid for it, even though, I mean, people have bought tons of those kits. So I made some money that way, but it felt like a modding project just by myself, right? And you kind of just do whatever you want, which is what you're doing when you do it. When you make a mod, you're like, well, I want the Galaxy to have 4 warp nacelles, so I'm gonna just make it like that. So you just do whatever you want. And in a way, it's kind of like that. That would be the closest I would say that I've come over the years to modding. I've done some contract work, but again, it's not the same, because you're helping out somebody else with their game, and or whatever it is that they're doing. So not quite the same.
And have you ever tried mods in recent years?
You know, usually whatever game I'm working on is the game that I play. So I don't usually get into I don't find myself in a situation where I'm thinking, man, I sure would like to, get some add-ons to this game. I play WoW occasionally, but I don't even really use very much in the way of add-ons for that game. I just kind of play it as they give it to you. But usually I'm engrossed in the thing that I'm currently working on, and so I don't get it. Unfortunately, I don't get out to do it. You know, and there's only so many hours in the day.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the biggest enemy of every product, everything you do in life.
Yeah, and when you go and make your hobby your job, now you have to go find a different hobby. So, and for me, it's like I really enjoy my job, and in a way, it's kind of still like that, but I get the artistic part of it. A lot of times from doing my own side projects and pushing my skills that way. And, sometimes that does, the good news is that does pay off in the industry, and I recommend it to any artist. It does pay off, but you really can push yourself when you're like, how far can I take this thing? Like modeling the threads and the bolts and the weld joints and all this crazy stuff, and modeling it to such a degree that you could practically 3D print it, assemble it, and use it in a workshop. Right? So that's a great challenge and really fun to do, to push yourself that way. So in a way, I still sort of have this as a hobby, but once I get down to like when I'm working on a game, I'm pretty heads down on that stuff and working on it like with everything I have. So almost to the point where sometimes I'll dream about things I'm working on. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's when you get absorbed by a product, you're like having an occasional dream about it.
Yep. Happened to me once or twice. So you never heard about Star Trek Armada 3 and 4?
I didn't hear about 4. I played 3 for a minute. But life being what it is, I was pretty busy. I ended up on Empire Earth after that initial pass on Legacy, if you've ever heard of that. Completely different kind of game. And I put a ton of effort into that. And it was kind of one of my first like early senior roles, in my first few years in the industry, where they were like, hey, we're going to make you a senior. And I'm like, wow, really? And so that came with a lot of weight. And so I was really engrossed in that game, and I played it constantly. If I wasn't working on it, I played it. And so I disappeared for a little while with that game. And then I went to Sony, and that's where I did Galaxies. And I disappeared off the map for about 5 years because I was working on that game. And like I said, I play pretty religiously when I'm working on a game, and I played the crap out of Galaxies. So I pretty much vanished for a while. And those games just kind of came and went, and mods came and went, and all that stuff came and went. And I didn't surface until DC Universe Online started up, and we were in pre-production for a while, so I could breathe for that game. That was the 2007, 2008, something like that.
Especially when you're working on such big titles like Star Wars Galaxies or DC Universe, having a game like Star Trek Armada 3, which is based on the Sins of a Solar Empire engine, you just don't need another time sink.
Yep.
And yeah, those games take hours to play just one session.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yep, it's why I don't play MMOs as hard as I used to. I think if I were working on an MMO, I would definitely play it because that's how you do it. But when I'm not working on that specific game, I think sort of my go-to is Warcraft, and then whenever I feel like I have some time to do that kind of thing, I still do, like I said before, a lot of my own projects. So
Totally a side question here, but did you ever go to LAN parties or host LAN parties?
we did have one at my house in Austin back. It was a long time ago. Yeah, we had one at the house, and I forget what game it was even for. It might have been Halo. I'm trying to remember. It was a long time ago. I didn't do that very often, and if I were going to do it, it would be in my house. Because I had a giant game room in my house in Austin, so I had a lot of computers and stuff, and so we've done that at least once. Yeah, it'd be more likely that I would do a tabletop game, which I've played a ton of Star Trek tabletop games over the years. I know this is a video game podcast, but there's a lot of good tabletop games out there, and I played quite a few of those.
Especially more and more Star Trek tabletops are out there. This is really a good development currently. I'm also into that.
Oh yeah, and all the way from you paint the miniatures to the miniatures are already painted, and that's kind of nice. And I've played a number of them, and Star Wars ones, and BattleTech ones, and Dungeons and Dragons. So I've done a ton of that. And the nice thing about the tabletop game is you play it, then you go home, and it doesn't gobble up. It eats up the time that you're in, and you have fun, and you see your friends, and then you go home, and that's it. Back to business.
Absolutely. It's another side project, I guess, for you, especially since you are so artistic, talented.
I always thought it would be interesting to work on a tabletop game, but I'm not really sure where my talents would fit in for something like that since I'm more of a 3D artist. I suppose coming up with stuff to print could be one avenue, right? Well, you could but I mean, so many people already do that. And I have a good number of miniatures that I've gotten that were 3D printed. I even got one, I got a ship from Star Trek Online 3D printed to add to my collection.
Yeah, they had many years back the option that you could 3D print your custom starship.
Yeah, I did that. And it was already colored. They somehow printed it colored.
Yeah, sadly, I think this option was only available in the US, so I never had the temptation. I would have done it.
Yeah. Well, it was cool. It wasn't cheap, but it was cool. I only did one, but because I wanted a physical copy, and now it's boxed up with all my gaming miniatures. So,
yeah, coming slowly to an end. The one big question for me left would be, what would basically be your dream project? If you had unlimited resources, what would you like to do?
man, that's a tough question. I'm sure you've heard of Star Citizen.
Yeah.
You ever heard of that? I crowdfunded that game early on and was really interested in it. And I think that it's a really cool game. And I think games like that are very cool. And I like that idea. I think it would be really something to see something like that in the Star Wars or Star Trek universe, where you could kind of play from that first person / third person angle, where you're the person running around and doing stuff. And maybe you're not a starship captain, but maybe you do other stuff in the universe or something like that. I mean, maybe you are, right? But I mean, I think it would be really hard to pull off, especially for something like Star Trek. It'd probably be easier for Star Wars because Star Citizen and Star Wars and all of that are they're compatible to some degree. And Star Trek, the ships are enormous. But I still think that idea of a seamless world is really freaking cool. And that was kind of the thing that drew me to that. And I think it would be a very time consuming project to build either one of those universes to the degree that they've built Star Citizen. That's like, it's mind boggling. So after they really got going on it, I was afraid to play because I was afraid that I would end up getting lost in there, never come out. So I was careful about my time playing, and didn't allow myself to buy extra ships or any of that stuff. But I mean, a game like that, I mean, you can imagine for a fan would be like mind blowing, you know. So I think that's probably pretty close to my best answer for that.
Yep, I definitely vote for that with my wallet. If you ever do this, you have my money.
Sure, sure. Me and 400 developers. I think you would need a lot to build that. I mean, look how long it's taking Star Citizen to build that world. It's an enormous world, and you can't just make it overnight. But yeah, I mean, it would be quite a project. I think you could maybe, in a way, Star Citizen kind of released a little bit at a time through their, beta testing paradigm and crowdfunding setup, and even with the microtransactions so that they could do pieces of the game at a time. I think you could probably do a piece of the game, but you would have to be real quick on turnaround because people would get bored. Even if it was a great game, people would be like, well, I want another planet, or I want another ship, or more adventures, right? And so you'd have to like be cranking hardcore on that. And plus the fidelity of the art. Like you can make and I'm not by any means putting WoW down. I think the art is brilliant, but it's easier to make than Star Citizen, right? Because Star Citizen the environments are very, very detailed and really hold up. Even the older environments really hold up. And, Warcraft, the requirements for that game are much lower, which is the beauty of stylized, right? I like stylized art quite a bit because it'll hold up without you killing yourself, right? And you kind of have to kill yourself for Star Citizen because it's the artistic fidelity is really high. So if you tried to do that for a Star Wars or Star Trek game, it would take you a minute to get that off the ground. Be fun though. Be my last project. I'd spend the next 20 years on it. Then I'd retire.
But I would also be happy with Star Wars Galaxies too. So I'm happy with easy things.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, Galaxies was kind of like an attempt at that. It was a giant open worlds, like 8 of them. And there was no loading screens, right? There's no loading screens in Star Citizen. There's none in this. But back then, the models were okay, but they were nowhere near what we can do in the modern era with artwork. Yeah, I'd like to see something new, just like you said, Star Wars Galaxies 2 or something would be a lot of fun. I think I might be afraid of being addicted to it, but yeah.
Well, then the real last question for me would be, since we have the Star Trek September, how did you get into Star Trek?
I have liked Star Trek ever since I can remember. I watched the original series on old TVs back in the 70s and 80s, and I watched all those old episodes. And then I was there when the movies came out, and I watched all of those, and Star Trek 2 blew my mind like it did everybody else. And I was there for the whole thing. So I don't remember a time not liking it or it not being part of my thinking. So I liked Star Trek before I liked Star Wars because I saw it before Star Wars came out. And then, I saw Star Wars, and of course that's like perfectly designed for a kid basically. And I just ate that up, of course. So I'm very attached to that, as you can tell. So I'd say those two properties got me very, very early in life and sort of steered my direction.
It's definitely a good addiction to have. I also love it, and
Costly.
especially I think I see in the background there are some Eagle Moss ships.
Yeah, there are some Eagle Moss ships. I actually have a pretty big collection. I've got this guy here that sits right on my desk, right in my face. But yeah, I actually have a huge collection of Eagle Moss ships, but they're all boxed up now. And I don't have a big office. I just have this little cubicle area. So someday I will take all of those out. Back when they were called Eagle Moss, right? I will end up re-displaying those someday. And yeah, those were great models. I also I'm sure you've heard of the whole big Tommy Plus ships that they've been releasing like one a year, crowdfunding.
You mean no crowdfunding? I don't know.
Oh, I'll send you a link after. But last year they did one for the refit, the Star Trek the Motion Picture version. It was, and it's about 3 feet long.
I only know from Eagle Moss the studio model for the Enterprise D, where you basically build your Enterprise D.
This is not that. It is, you're going to be upset though because it's long gone.
Yeah, as always.
It's die cast. So it's an enormous die cast Enterprise.
I see. Well, I had to fight my drug addiction 2 years ago when Eagle Moss went bankrupt and they sold all the old assets, and I bought so many Eagle Moss ships, and it was expensive as hell.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm dropping it in the chat right now.
Oh, this looks nice.
Yeah.
This looks really nice.
So I crowdfunded it like a year ago. And so I should be getting one of those here eventually. It'll be like the centerpiece of my collection. Yeah, pretty freaking cool. And of course, it's my favorite ship, as I said before. So it just makes sense that I would have to get that.
Well, then I would say this is the part of the video where I open the mic to you. Is there anything you would like to add? Anything we missed?
Dude, I think you interviewed me very thoroughly.
I like to hear that.
Yes, you asked every question. I can't think of anything else. No, I would definitely say you got me there. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
You're so welcome to join me anytime. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and a big thank you from me, and I guess from many in the community, for all the work you have done.
Right on.
We love your games, we still play them, we still maintain them, and luckily they all have direct IP support, so we can still play them.
Yeah, that's great. You'll have to send me some of that after.
Oh yes, I will. But for now, I would say that's it for this video. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time, bye bye.